Saint John Paul II was a mystic. He dialogued with Our Lady, and had prophetic visions. Pope John Paul II was enraptured while presiding the Eucharist, some claim. Then Vatican speaker Joaquin Navarro Valls said that sometimes after praying, Pope John Paul II would fall into ecstasy, and then it was necessary to carry him by his feet from the chapel to his bed. Cardinal Giovanni Re was a direct witness of the 26.5 years of Pope John Paul II's pontificate, and he revealed the Holy Father's secret for making difficult decisions. He prayed for a long time. On May 13, 1981, the 64th anniversary of Fatima's first apparition, the saint survived an assassin's bullets in St. Peter's Square. He thanked Our Lady for her intervention, and likened himself to the bishop in white killed in the third Fatima secret. The Holy Father then entrusted the world to the Immaculate Heart on December 8, 1981, the Solemnity of Mary's Immaculate Conception, and again on May 13, 1982, 1 year after the attack, the 65th anniversary of Fatima. Because of his depth of prayer and discernment, Pope John Paul II decided in 1984 that the whole world now needed the powerful help of Our Lady to counter the errors of communist Russia. So, Saint John Paul II asked all the Catholic bishops of the Church to join him in consecrating the whole world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, with special prayers for those countries such as Russia that particularly needed her intercession. Finally, on the Solemnity of the Annunciation on March 25, 1984, St. John Paul II consecrated the world. He omitted mention of Russia, but prayed that Our Lady enlighten and bless those peoples for whom you yourself are awaiting our act of consecration and entrusting. Weeks later, on the very feast of Fatima, May 13, 1984, an explosion at the Soviet arsenal in Severomorsk destroyed 2/3 of its main fleet's projectiles. That prevented the invasion Moscow had plotted when Washington looked set to gain nuclear superiority with the planned Star Wars anti-ballistic missile system. 3 years later, on December 8, 1987, the Immaculate Conception Feast, Soviet leader Konstantin Chernenko died. His successor Mikhail Gorbachev launched sweeping reforms, which led to the collapse of Soviet communism 4 years later. Sister Lucia said the 1984 consecration was accepted by God, the Soviet Union collapsed and Russia officially returned to the Christian faith. Today daily prayer and Christian instruction are required in Russian public schools. In a public ceremony broadcast throughout Russia, President Vladimir Putin and his political staff kissed the icon of Our Lady of Kazan, the holiest image of Our Lady as Queen of Russia. Pope John Paul began his pontificate in a difficult time for the world. He personally experienced what were two totalitarian, godless and inhumane systems, Nazism and communism, that deeply scarred the lives of the people of the 20th century and brought upon them untold suffering. The Holy Father did not have any army. He faced challenges that could cause fear and a feeling of helplessness. But his weapon was truth and belief that God will claim his children, created in his image and likeness. There is no doubt that the Pope, who came to Rome from a distant country, from Poland, made a major contribution to the collapse of the communist system. He teaches us to entrust everything to God, to have hope in him, and to build our world upon eternal values, inscribed in natural law and the gospel. John Paul II followed the logic of the gospel, the logic of merciful love. In response to the great provocations and challenges of the modern world, the Holy Father called for building a civilization of love. He was a defender of authentic marital love, which is open to life, and is the foundation of every family. His encyclical Evangelium Vitae is a great Magna Carta of the Church's teaching on the dignity and sanctity of human life. Pope John Paul II defended life, demanded the right to life for the unborn, those who are the most vulnerable and do not have a voice. After John Paul II's death, we were struck by the call of God's people for the official recognition of His holiness. This desire has already been fulfilled in a very short time, also thanks to the personal involvement of Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis. Holiness in a sense is a synthesis of all that John Paul II was, the attitude he had, how he loved and served. It was an ordinary holiness, lived and attained day after day in prayer and service. But, Pope John Paul II was also a mystic. He was immersed in God. He would stand every day before God, to contemplate the face of God, and God led him to serve the Church and the world. In the saintly Pope, prayer and service intertwined into one. Through his holiness, he drew us all to the ideal of holiness and to our calling to holiness. This is also his legacy. Memory of him is constantly alive in the hearts of millions of Christians around the world.
As English speakers, we typically learn about the American side of the Cold War, with leaders like Kennedy and Reagan, and even Harry Truman. But many of us have never studied Russian history in school, or at least are a little bit hazy on the events that took place in Russia during the Cold War. I'm just going to briefly go over the Soviet leaders from Lenin to Gorbachev. So we're going to start with Vladimir Lenin, who was in power from 1917 to 1922. And born in 1870, Lenin's greatest contributions were his roles as Russian revolutionary, the leader of the Bolshevik Party, and the first premier of the Soviet Union. He was the founder of the ideology of Leninism, which was later expanded into Marxism-Leninism by Joseph Stalin. In 1917, Lenin was elected by the Russian Soviet Congress. At the time, the Soviet Union was faced with the threat of a German invasion. Lenin argued that Russia should sign a peace treaty. However, other Bolshevik leaders advocated continuing the war. As Germany launched their invasion, much of Russia's western territory was lost. This turn of events bolstered Lenin's popularity, and he gained the support of the Bolshevik leadership. Russia eventually signed a treaty in March of 1918. In August of 1918, a member of the Socialist Revolutionary Party attempted to assassinate Lenin. His health and political power declined from that point forward. Following the death of Lenin, Joseph Stalin became the General Secretary of the Soviet Communist Party in 1922. Stalin's policies and leadership, based on Marxist-Leninist ideology, are often considered the foundation of a political and economic system called Stalinism. Under Stalin's rule, the Soviet Union was transformed from a nation based on agriculture to a global superpower. The industrialization of USSR was successful and also critical to defeating the Axis invasion during World War II. While it's certain that Stalin's social and economic policies laid the foundations for Russia's emergence as a superpower, the harshness in which this transformation took place was later repudiated by his successors in the Communist Party leadership. Stalin is generally thought to be directly or indirectly responsible for the death of millions of Russians. On March 1st, 1953, after an all-night dinner, Stalin collapsed, suffering a stroke that paralyzed the right side of his body. He died 4 days later on March 5th, 1953, at the age of 73. Next we have Georgy Malenkov, and upon Stalin's death he succeeded to all of Stalin's titles, but was forced to resign most of them within a month. Through the office of Premier, Malenkov was locked in a power struggle against Nikita Khrushchev. His 2-year term ended in a failure, and was soon replaced with Nikita Khrushchev. And Khrushchev was the first secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union from 1953 to 1964, and chairman of the Council of Ministers from 1958 to 1964. During World War II, Khrushchev served as a political leader with the equivalent rank of lieutenant general. Throughout the world and within Russia, he was considered a leader with a bad temper. Khrushchev was responsible for establishing the Warsaw Pact, which was an alliance between Eastern Europe and Eastern Bloc countries that felt threatened by NATO during the Cold War. Khrushchev was also responsible for putting forth the doctrine of peaceful coexistence into foreign policy. He led the way for the Soviet space program that launched the Sputnik 1 and Yuri Gagarin into space. He played an important role in the deployment of missiles in Cuba, which led to the Cuban Missile Crisis. He is also responsible for the construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961. Leonid Brezhnev remained outwardly loyal to Khrushchev, but in 1963 he became involved in a plot to remove Khrushchev from power. In that same year, Brezhnev was named Secretary of the Central Committee, making him the likely successor to Khrushchev. In October of 1964, while Khrushchev was on vacation, Brezhnev and his conspirators removed Khrushchev from office. Under Brezhnev rule, relations with China continued to deteriorate. In 1969, Soviet and Chinese troops fought a series of clashes along the border. Brezhnev supported the North Vietnamese in the Vietnam War, and in January of 1969, a Soviet army officer tried to assassinate Brezhnev. The highlight of Brezhnev's reign was the easing of tensions and the signing of the Helsinki Act in 1975, and this recognized the post-war frontiers in Eastern and Central Europe and effectively legitimized Soviet domination over the region. During the 1970s, the Soviet Union reached the peak of its strategic and world power due to the fact that a treaty established parity in nuclear weapons between Russia and the United States. The Soviet Union extended its political influence in the Middle East and Africa, and it also successfully intervened in the 1975 Civil War in Angola. The last years of Brezhnev's rule were marked by a growing personality cult, and his unfortunate legacy to his successors was his decision to intervene in Afghanistan in 1979, and this maneuver resulted in the subsequent grain embargo of the United States. Brezhnev died of a heart attack in November of 1982. Yuri Andropov was a Soviet politician and General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union from November of 1982 until his untimely death just 16 months later. During his rule, Andropov made attempts to improve the economy and reduce political corruption. He initiated campaigns against alcohol and struggled to increase work discipline amongst the people of Russia. Unfortunately, these campaigns were carried out using an approach that was reminiscent of Joseph Stalin's strong-handed reign. Andropov made little progress in foreign policy as the war continued in Afghanistan. His rule was also marked by the weakening of relations with the United States. One of his most notable acts was responding to a letter from an American child and inviting her to the Soviet Union. After several months of failing health, Andropov died of kidney failure in February of 1984. Konstantin Chernenko was the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and led the country from February of 1984 until his death 13 months later. Chernenko's rule represented a return to the hardline policies of Brezhnev. He supported a larger role for the unions, pushed for reform in education, and wanted to trim bureaucracy. Unfortunately, he also escalated the Cold War with the United States. Chernenko's poor health made him an ineffective governor of Russia. He was frequently absent from office. Surprisingly, Chernenko's short time in office brought about some significant policy changes. He gave much greater emphasis to public opinion and used the resources of his country to invest in consumer goods, services, and agriculture. And finally, we arrive at our last Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev tried to move the Communist Party and the economy by introducing openness, restructuring, and the acceleration of economic development. The law on cooperatives, which was enacted in 1987, was the most extreme of the economic reforms, enabling private ownership of businesses and services, manufacturing, and foreign trade. People in Russia were given the freedom of speech, and the news was now less controlled and political prisoners were released. In 1987, Gorbachev called for the introduction of democratic elements into the Soviet Union's political process. Gorbachev also sought to improve political relations and trade with the West. He and Ronald Reagan met in Iceland, which eventually led to the signing of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, or INF, of 1987. And in early 1989, Gorbachev completed the withdrawal of Russian forces from Afghanistan. The loosening of Soviet control over Eastern Europe effectively ended the Cold War, and Gorbachev was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1990. The democratization of the USSR stripped away the power of the Communist Party and Gorbachev.
Дорогие россияне, осталось совсем немного времени до магической даты в нашей истории. Наступает 2000 год. Новый век. Новое тысячелетие. Мы все примеряли эту дату на себя, прикидывали, сначала в детстве, потом повзрослев, сколько нам будет в 2000 году, а сколько нашей маме, а сколько нашим детям. Казалось, когда-то так далеко, это необыкновенный Новый год. Вот этот день и настал. Дорогие друзья, дорогие мои, сегодня я в последний раз обращаюсь к вам с новогодним приветствием. Но это не все. Сегодня я в последний раз обращаюсь к вам как президент России. Я принял решение, долго и мучительно над ним размышлял. Сегодня, в последний день уходящего века я ухожу в отставку. Я много раз слышал, если любыми путями будет держаться за власть, он никому ее не отдаст. Это вранье. Дело в другом. Я всегда говорил, что не отступлю от Конституции ни на шаг, что в конституционные сроки должны пройти думские выборы. Так это и произошло. И также мне хотелось, чтобы вовремя состоялись президентские выборы в июне 2000 года. Это было очень важно для России. Мы создаем важнейший прецедент цивилизованной добровольной передачи власти от одного президента России другому, вновь избранному. И все же я принял другое решение. Я ухожу. Ухожу раньше положенного срока. Я понял, что мне необходимо это сделать. Россия должна войти в новое тысячелетие с новыми политиками, с новыми лицами, с новыми умными, сильными, энергичными людьми. А мы, те, кто стоит у власти уже многие годы, мы должны уйти. Посмотрев, с какой надеждой и верой люди проголосовали на выборах в Думу за новое поколение политиков, я понял, главное дело в своей жизни я сделал. Россия уже никогда не вернется в прошлое. Россия всегда теперь будет двигаться только вперед. И я не должен мешать этому естественному ходу истории. Полгода еще держаться за власть, когда у страны есть сильный человек, достойный быть президентом, и с которым сегодня практически каждый россиянин связывает свои надежды на будущее. Почему я должен ему мешать? Зачем ждать еще полгода? Нет, этого не по мне, просто не по моему характеру. Сегодня, в этот необыкновенно важный для меня день, хочу сказать чуть больше личных своих слов, чем говорю обычно. Я хочу попросить у вас прощения за то, что многие наши с вами мечты не сбылись, за то, что нам казалось просто, оказалось мучительно тяжело. Я прошу прощения за то, что не оправдал некоторых надежд тех людей, которые верили, что мы одним махом, одним рывком, одним знаком сможем перепрыгнуть с серого, застойного, тоталитарного прошлого в светлое, богатое, цивилизованное будущее. Я сам в это верил. Казалось, что чуть поднатужимся и все одолеем. Одним рывком не получилось. В чем-то я оказался слишком наивным. Где-то проблемы оказались слишком сложными. Мы продирались вперед через ошибки, через неудачи. Многие люди в это сложное время испытали потрясение. Но я хочу, чтобы вы знали, я никогда этого не говорил. Сегодня мне важно вам это сказать. Боль каждого из вас отзывалась болью во мне, в моем сердце, бессонная ночь, мучительные переживания. Что надо сделать, чтобы людям хотя бы чуточку, хотя бы немножко жилось легче и лучше, не было у меня более важной задачи. Я ухожу. Я сделал все, что мог. Мне на смену приходит новое поколение, поколение тех, кто может сделать больше и лучше. В соответствии с Конституцией, уходя в отставку, я подписал указ о возложении обязанностей президента России на председателя правительства Владимира Владимировича Путина. В течение 3 месяцев он будет главой государства, а через 3 месяца, также в соответствии с Конституцией, состоятся выборы президента. Я всегда был уверен в удивительной мудрости россиян. Поэтому не сомневаюсь, какой выбор вы сделаете в конце марта 2000 года. Прощаясь, я хочу сказать каждому из вас: будьте счастливы. Вы заслужили счастье. Вы заслужили счастье и спокойствие. С Новым годом, с Новым веком, дорогие мои.
Дорогие друзья, сегодня, в новогоднюю ночь, я, как и вы, с родными и друзьями, собирался выслушать слова приветствия президента России Бориса Николаевича Ельцина. Но вышло иначе. Сегодня, 31 декабря 1999 года, первый президент России принял решение уйти в отставку. Он просил меня обратиться к стране. Дорогие россияне, дорогие соотечественники, сегодня на меня возложена обязанность главы государства. Через 3 месяца состоятся выборы президента России. Обращаю внимание на то, что ни минуты не будет вакуума власти в стране. Не было и не будет. Я хочу предупредить, что любые попытки выйти за рамки российских законов, за рамки Конституции России, будут решительно пресекаться. Свобода слова, свобода совести, свобода средств массовой информации, права собственности — эти основополагающие элементы цивилизованного общества будут надежно защищены государством. Вооруженные силы, Федеральная пограничная служба, органы правопорядка осуществляют свою работу в обычном, в прежнем режиме. Государство стояло и будет стоять на страже безопасности каждого нашего человека. Принимая свое решение о передаче власти, президент действовал в полном соответствии с Конституцией страны. По-настоящему оценить, как много сделал этот человек для России, можно только через какое-то время. Хотя уже сегодня ясно, то, что Россия пошла по пути демократии и реформ, не свернула с этого пути, смогла заявить себя как сильное независимое государство, в этом его огромная заслуга. Я хочу пожелать первому президенту России, Борису Николаевичу Ельцину, здоровья и счастья. Новый год — это самый светлый, самый добрый, самый любимый праздник на Руси. В Новый год, как известно, сбываются мечты. А в такой необыкновенный Новый год уж тем более. Все доброе и все хорошее, задуманное вами, обязательно сбудется. Дорогие друзья, до наступления 2000 года остались считанные секунды. Давайте улыбнемся нашим родным и близким. Пожелаем друг другу тепла, счастья, любви. И поднимем бокалы за новый век России, за любовь и мир в каждом нашем доме, за здоровье наших родителей и детей. С Новым годом вас! С Новым веком!
It is one of the tallest cathedrals in the Orthodox Church, built just outside Moscow at the military-themed Patriot Park. The Resurrection of Christ Cathedral is a shrine to Russia's armed forces.
With this harmony between the might of the armed forces and the spiritual might of the Church, of the spiritual and material, of Church and State, let the path of our people go into the future in peace and prosperity. And of this path, God willing, let there be new victories, new achievements, and no defeats.
A military megachurch built in just under 600 days. The main dome stretching out a precise 19.45 meters, symbolizing the year the Second World War ended and the atheist Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany.
I am absolutely sure that all those who will come here will remember our country's past heroic deeds and prepare for future feats.
Replete with icons, old and new, as well as metal salvaged from Nazi military hardware. But these secular flourishes have not impressed everyone in the Orthodox Church.
I am afraid that this is not the subject of a religious Orthodox cult. It is a cult object of a new religion, the civil religion of Russia, religion of victory, cult of victory. It turns out that our altar is not decided to Christ, not to Christ's victory, but to something completely different.
There are wider concerns that using religion as a way to honour the military will lead to not just a loss of independence, but create a mythologized history.
This is not about religion, this is for the army, as current military and state leaders think Russia needs an ideology. We need political control over the armed forces, and since, for the time being, official ideology is prohibited, they invented that the Russian Orthodox faith will be an imitation of such an ideology.
It's a symbol of President Putin's new state ideology, elevating the army to a quasi-religious rank, and among the pomp and ceremony, the creation of a new history. Sonia Gallego, Al Jazeera.
Парад! Смирно! Для встречи слева!
Now, while the new series is on, we're uploading classic Unreported World episodes every Wednesday. This week's takes us to Russia to meet the country's most prolific parents. The government's expansionist intentions have extended into family life, it seems, where they reward ultra-fertile parents, including one family with 18 children. But the darker side of the resurgence in traditional values is a rise in homophobia and the removal of women's rights. This episode was first aired in March, when Marcel Theroux went to find out more.
On the banks of the River Don, in the southeast of Russia, an extraordinary service is taking place. Members of Russia's 1,000-year-old Orthodox Church are washing away their sins with an icy swim. Incredible as it sounds, scenes like this are taking place across Russia today, because this is the Feast of Epiphany. People are jumping into cold water everywhere. But this place has a special significance. This is the Don River. This is the Cossack heartland of Russia. And the Cossacks are seen as the guardian of the eternal Russian values of patriotism, God, and family. This is also the sign of an extraordinary revival. For most of the last 100 years, the church was persecuted by the communist government. Now, the Orthodox Church and President Vladimir Putin are new best friends. Leading the service is Father Yevgeny Osyak, one of 18 children in a family who are becoming national celebrities. At the Church of the Holy Trinity in nearby Rostov-on-Don, the Osyak sisters form the core of the choir. Down below is the patriarch of the family, Father Ioan Osyak. He and his children are a symbol of the new Russia, religious, conservative, and deeply patriotic. Did you ever imagine that the Orthodox Church would have the importance that it has today?
Если я в детстве шел в церковь, ну, скажем, конец 60-х, когда за волосы вытаскивали, то сейчас совершенно по-другому. Сейчас полная свобода. Я очень благодарен нашему президенту Владимиру Владимировичу Путину. Как бы странно это ни казалось, и как бы что бы ни говорилось бы, но этот человек сегодня как отец, вот, как мой отец, беспокоится за каждого человека в стране. Беспокоится о том, чтобы и многодетные семьи были, много чего.
The church looks ancient, but it's barely 20 years old. Since President Putin came to power, 25,000 new churches have been built. Oh, hello. I'm Marcel. What is this place?
This place is a TV studio.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, the first Christian TV in south of Russia.
It's the first Christian TV station?
It is.
From next door, there's the sound of gunfire. They're editing a new show, and it's not songs of praise. I'm scared. I think they're going to attack me.
They're doing this type of stuff to be sure that the child can protect himself, his family.
Russian Orthodoxy is not a turn-the-other-cheek religion. This military training was organised by a local priest. Rostov's just 100 kilometers away from the contested border with Ukraine. Father Ioan has invited me to meet his family in the suburbs of Rostov-on-Don. This is where Father Johann lives with his wife, Nadezhda. I've come to meet her to find out about the reality of being the mother to 18 children. Wow. It's big. Hello. Nice to meet you. Beautiful. I speak English as well as her other talents. The Osyaks have 10 sons and 8 daughters, ranging in age from 7 to 33, and 25 grandchildren too. Nadezhda had her first child at 18.
Как только я закончила школу, я ушла работать на хлебозавод. А потом повенчались, и у нас родился первый ребенок. Я ушла в декретный отпуск. И вот у меня декретный отпуск продолжался 28 лет. Ни разу не прерывался.
Her daughters are also starting their families young.
Это Иван Ильич.
Иван Ильич?
Иван Ильич. Вот мама.
Нет, мама идет.
Мама его.
Дочка моя. Дочка, здравствуйте.
А вот еще вторая у нее, видите?
И как вас зовут?
Мария.
Мария, очень приятно, Мария. Меня зовут Марсел. Maria's 18. She's the Osyak's 12th child. Seraphim is the 13th. And 13, is that an unlucky number in Russian?
Счастливый.
Пойдемте, да? Пойдем.
The Osyaks are exceptional in a country where the population has been shrinking for the last 20 years. Their exemplary fertility has been recognised by the government with a special medal.
А вот он орден, вот. Мы одни из первых в России.
To be eligible for the Order of Parental Glory, you must have 7 or more children and be morally upstanding. The Osyaks tick all the boxes. Oh, Nadezhda's coming out with hers.
А это международный.
Международный. Поздравляю.
Она бриллианты такие.
А это вот родительская слава, которую нас наградили.
What did you feel when you met the president and he gave you the award?
Ну, это было очень так торжественно и трогательно. Конечно, приятно то, что заметили нас, что столько деток.
Знаете почему? Потому что сама по себе женщина, это как Богом созданная, да? А когда она еще в положении, то это очень высокое предназначение человека. Она дает человека еще в мир.
Their youngest, 7-year-old Anastasia, also has something to boast about. Oh, that's your tooth. Поставить подушки?
Я сзади засунула пластилин, другой выкинула, и вот осталось.
The most striking thing about this house is how amazingly tidy it is. Looks like it's ready for a magazine shoot. In this showpiece home, even the teenagers' bedrooms are immaculate. Anya is 16.
За всем этажом.
Oh, okay.
А это ее комната личная.
Очень...
Покажи.
Она тоже очень аккуратная.
У нее самая чистая комната.
Anya, do you want to have a big family too?
Да, ну сколько Господь даст. Очень много хочу. Как у мамы с папой. Хорошо, что у нас верующие, православные. Это самое, что главное. И родители у меня папа самый.
We go in search of the rest of the family and find most of them hanging out in the basement. Wow! Oh my God, здравствуйте! There's so many people. Hi. Oh, sorry. Gordon Bennett. I'm whisked off to see the rest of the facilities. Okay, let's look at the swimming pool. Wow. I'm wondering how he paid for all this on his church salary.
Вот в России очень много людей добрых. И вот этот дом у нас построен чисто на благотворителей построен. Ну, те, которые нас нашли просто...
He tells me the donors include the country's richest woman, the head of the National Railways, and a billionaire MP. All keen to associate themselves with the Osyak's family values. Father Johann is not just free to practice his religion, he's well rewarded for it. His family has become a shiny advert for the new values that Vladimir Putin wants to promote: family, God, and country. There's another side to the resurgence of the Orthodox Church, a wave of intolerance, with homophobic views and graphic descriptions of abortion on TV.
Понимаете, эти люди, вот эти, так сказать, геи, голубые, как их там называют?
На Западе политическую власть в значительной мере захватило вот это вот извращенческое меньшинство.
Способов. Как у немцев было 1000 способов сгноить миллион людей, так сегодня у этих всех палачей в белых халатах есть 1000 способов как бы выскоблить человека из материнского организма.
This is brand new broadcaster Zargrad TV. It's like this bizarre amalgam of Fox News and the Russian Orthodox Church. But they're deadly serious about this. Their message is that liberal values are over and this is the future. Wow, this is nice. I'm meeting its founder, Konstantin Malafeyev. Hi, Marcel Theroux, nice to meet you. He's a banker with vast riches, huge energy, and Kremlin connections.
Our audience is pretty young. These people who grew up after millennium, they're very orthodox. They are conservative, they're traditionalist, and they believe that liberals, it's sort of hippie.
He's got a vision for Russia.
Back to Russian Empire time, when we were orthodox, when we have 7 children for one family, when we were proud to be Russian.
Konstantin Malafeyev's pride in Russia has led to him being hit with international sanctions for giving money to the rebels in Ukraine. Felt this was necessary? An Orthodox TV channel was something you wanted to do?
Yes, of course. Orthodoxy, that's the way of life.
But people in the West see the rise of orthodoxy here also as an attack on gay people, an attack on women's right to abortion. That's something that you're very strongly critical of.
We are believers, and in the Bible they're called sodomites, so we call them sodomites.
The guru of the operation is this man, Alexander Dugin. He sees Russia and the West as opponents in a global spiritual battle. One writer called him Putin's brain. You believe that it's not likely that Russia and the West should come into conflict. It's inevitable.
The West is very aggressive, colonial, imperialist, and try to submit any other civilization under its will. We reject that exactly in the measure it attacks us.
But there is one aspect of the hypocritical West that has caught his fancy.
I really like Donald Trump. Trump's America is traditional and conservative, healthy and worthy of respect.
I'm catching the metro to an increasingly rare thing in Russia, a protest outside the Russian parliament, or Duma. The church believes there's such a thing as reasonable and loving physical punishment within a family, and wants violence against spouse or child decriminalized. It's -10, but a handful of women have braved the cold to protest outside the Duma. There's the second reading of the bill that would decriminalize domestic violence. 10,000 Russian women are estimated to die at the hands of their partners every year. Government has clamped down so much on protests in the last few years, they've become very scarce. And when protesters come here, there's a law that says they have to stand 50 meters apart. The new law would reduce the punishment for domestic violence from prison to a fine. It's a play on the MasterCard ad. It says to hit a wife, 5,000 rubles, to beat up a child, 7,000 rubles, family values, priceless. What do family values mean?
В нашей стране семейные традиции – это некое понятие, под которым понимаются, как правило, православные ценности, основанные на патриархате, основанные на силе мужчины и слабости женщины и его детей.
Здравствуйте. Do you think it's a lot to do with the influence of the church and on the government?
Церковь у нас очень часто оперирует посланием апостола Павла, в котором говорится, что боится жена мужа своего, и советует женщинам нести этот крест смирения, терпения, молчания.
A week later, President Putin signed the bill into law. As the bill was being passed, I went to see Konstantin Malafeyev at one of his other projects, a vast new school outside Moscow. I'd heard he was a supporter of the bill. There's a bill in Parliament right now to decriminalise domestic violence.
Oh, we are for that. That was us behind this.
Well,
we are lobbying group behind this, of course.
Which lobbying? You personally or the channel? Or Zagrad?
All of us.
So isn't it bad when someone beats their wife?
Never allow state to interfere in your family. We know exactly what would happen if state would start to interfere in the family. Family is sacral.
People like Konstantin Malafeyev want a Russian Empire 2.0. Great, like the USSR, but which doesn't meddle in its citizens' lives. And it's part of a whole family values agenda that not only should families be big, but the state shouldn't intervene, even when there's violence going on in the home. I'm back in Rostov-on-Don. I'm on my way to visit another big family. In fact, the biggest family in the entire country. They show a very different side of Russia. The woman I'm about to meet has been a mother to more than 70 children. While the government wants upstanding Russians to have bigger families, an estimated 600,000 children have parents who can't or won't take care of them. The government can't persuade enough Russians to adopt and is relying on a few exceptional people like Tatyana Sorokina. She's adopted 48 children and fostered more. In all, she's taken in 76.
Любую работу можно отложить. Постирать можно завтра, убрать можно завтра, а кушать хочется всегда.
Can you tell me how you end up adopting the children?
Ну, это же алкоголизм родителей. Они голодовали. Многие приезжают первые дни, они вот едят и с собой под матрасы прячут, под подушки прячут еду. Все мало было.
Дети, кушать!
6-year-old Kostya was abandoned by his parents and left to fend for himself on the streets.
На столе половина. За столом или кем находимся? Быстро кушать.
Next to him is Kolya, aged 5.
У нас Коля быстрее всех кушает.
He's already been rejected by one adoptive family. Now Tatyana's trying to socialize him.
Заебался, как не кушают люди, которые свиньи кушают.
Мне еще домой вообще надо ехать. Так что-то не писано.
Коля, рот закрой, а теперь открывай и кушай быстро.
There's two ways here. There's Tatyana's way and the highway. And Kolya's a new arrival. He's only been here a couple of months. So that's why she's being kind of tough with him. She wants him to behave properly. After supper, the children let off steam in the basement they've named the sports hall. You can see they go a bit crazy down here. Well, I suppose there's 18 of you living in a house, however big it is. There's got to be somewhere where you go and just go completely nuts, and this is it. Once, thousands of Russian children found homes abroad. But Russia has clamped down on adoption to countries that permit gay marriage and banned adoption by Americans outright. I've got a sort of ringing headache from being down in the sports hall with all those kids going crazy. And it's incredible to think that is Tatyana's reality 24/7, looking after so many children. But it's also moving when you think that a lot of those kids came from difficult circumstances And if it weren't for her, they would be leading lives that are considerably worse. The next morning, Tatiana and family are off to the supermarket. The state gives Tatiana some money for the children, but it barely covers food.
18-е, 19-е. Так, раз, два, три, четыре, пять, шесть.
I asked Tatiana what kind of family Kolya comes from.
Мама больная на голову, много детей, 6 детей. А этих 4 детей взяла приемная семья, другая, не моя, другая. В общем, 3 детей хорошие, а этот плохой.
И какие проблемы с ним?
Истерики, поведение плохое. Но уже вот 2 месяца начинает, нашли подход.
She tells me Kolya is desperate to start kindergarten next week. She said he can, if he behaves.
И вот он понемножку старается.
I want to know if he'll make it. But first, it's time to say goodbye to the Osyaks. I'm joining them for church. They're in their Sunday best, mink coats, even though it's Friday. Today is a special service to honour Father Johan's patron saint, John the Baptist. 5 of his sons are serving alongside him. Whether you're devout or not, this is an amazing spectacle. It's like a piece of theatre. The doors keep opening and closing. The air is full of the smell of incense. It's got some undeniable power. After the end of the Soviet Union, many people thought it was only a matter of time before Russia became like the West. Instead, the Orthodox Church and Putin's government are rejecting the West and its values as they strive to make Russia great again.
Видно в писаниях, в священных писаниях, на которых я вырос, батюшка Серафим писал, что Россия ценой страданий придет к великой славе. И многие народы увидят, что она была на коленях, но встала и своей красотою, своей радостью и добротою ко всем народам, все народы низко поклонятся ей.
I've got one last goodbye to make. We got up at the crack of dawn to go to Tatiana's house because today is a big day for Kolya. Thanks to Tatiana's efforts, Kolya is ready to start kindergarten. Ваш последний первый день в садик для вас это последний? Вы думаете, что
Да, ребенок.
да, будет, да, больше?
Думаю, уже последний, больше маленьких не будет.
Да?
Да.
Вы уверены?
Нет. Нет, не уверена.
Thanks to Tatiana's love and hard work, Kolya now has a chance to be one of the citizens who'll shape Russia's future. Thanks to the rise of Russia's church, that future looks set to be conservative, religious, and nationalistic.
Hello everyone and welcome to Eye on Heraldry. Today's topic is gonna be the history, evolution, and meaning behind Russia's coat of arms or emblem. The story starts in 1472 when Ivan III or Ivan the Great, yes, that's the same Ivan who kicked the Tatars and Mongols from Moscow and expanded the current Kremlin. Ivan adopted the first coat of arms in 1472 as his seal when he married a Byzantine princess and adopted the Byzantine double-headed eagle as his own seal. That seal remained in use until it was later changed twice under the reign of his grandson Ivan IV or Ivan the Terrible, most noticeably to add St. George and the Dragon in 1589, which is currently used as the Moscow coat of arms. The next change happened in 1654 when the scepter and orb were added to the eagle's claws as well as a third crown. That same general design of a black double-headed eagle remained in use till the fall of the Russian Empire and the rise of the Soviet Union, with minor changes over the next 200 to 300 years. Then after that we get the Soviet Union emblem that changed and kept changing since it was adopted in 1923 till the fall of the Soviet Union. And to be honest, that one needs its own video, which I will get to at a later time. After the fall of the Soviet Union, in 1993 President Boris Yeltsin signed a decree to replace the communist design by the present-day coat of arms, which is derived largely from the imperial eagle, but it changed its colors from black to golden and removed the imperial blue ribbon as well as the collar of the Order of St. Andrew. As you can see, the eagle has retained its imperial crowns and they still remain on the coat of arms as of today. But today the imperial crowns on each head stand for the unity and sovereignty of Russia, both as a whole and as its own republics and regions. The orb and scepter grasped in the eagle's talons are traditional heraldic symbols of sovereign powers and authority. They have retained those in the modern Russian arms, despite the fact that the Russian Federation is not a monarchy.
Hello, I'm David Kerr. You're watching Shalom World News. Here are your latest headlines from around the globe. An official legal definition of marriage as between one man and one woman is among several amendments to the Russian constitution being proposed by the nation's president, Vladimir Putin. The lower house of Russia's parliament, the Duma, will vote on the president's proposed amendments this month ahead of a potential public vote in April. The proposal would also have to be approved by Russia's constitutional court. At present, neither same-sex marriage nor same-sex civil unions are legal in Russia.